It moves in silence, faster than anything we have catalogued, and yet it does not behave as silence should. Beyond the orbit of Jupiter, where light takes over 40 minutes to reach us, astronomers track a visitor with no allegiance to our star. Its official designation is 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object in human history. But unofficially, researchers whisper another name, the object that should not exist. When the Atlas Survey Telescope in Chile first caught the smudge of light in July 2025, nothing suggested crisis. At magnitude 20.5, it was faint, almost indistinguishable from background noise. The numbers told a familiar story, a body tens or perhaps hundreds of meters across, plunging through the solar system on a hyperbolic orbit. That word, hyperbolic, means this: it comes from beyond, and once it leaves, it will never return. Only two others had been seen before: Oumuamua in 2017, a cigar-shaped shard that accelerated as if pushed by invisible hands, and Borisov in 2019, a comet trailing gas and dust like the wanderers we know. But Atlas was different. It did not shine like Borisov, nor tumble like Oumuamua. Its spectrum was dark, almost metallic, absorbing light rather than scattering it. Its trajectory resisted prediction. Calculations showed tiny deviations, fractions of a kilometer per second, accumulating into measurable defiance of gravity itself. The numbers unsettled even hardened analysts. Expected velocity, 54.1 km/s, measured 56.8 km/s, a difference small to the eye, catastrophic to orbital mechanics. To a planet, 1 kilometer per second can mean the difference between a safe flyby and a collision carrying the energy of 10,000 nuclear detonations. Yet collision was not the threat. Even with margins of error, Atlas would miss Earth by millions of kilometers. The question was not where it would go. The question was why it moved the way it did. Non-gravitational acceleration is common in comets. Jets of gas erupting from their surfaces push them off course. We call it outgassing. But Atlas emitted no tail, no coma, no sign of sublimation. Its infrared signature was flat. No water vapor, no carbon dioxide, nothing that could explain the push. And still, the push was there. Astronomers called it artificial seeming. Engineers, more cautious, called it non-natural. And one voice, published in a closed NASA memo later leaked, asked the question no one wanted written in ink. What if the acceleration is not an accident of chemistry, but a function of design? Because if 3I Atlas carries intent, if it was built, not born, then the fact that it will not strike Earth is irrelevant. Its mere passage could alter the balance of our system in ways we are not prepared to measure, let alone survive. Interstellar objects are supposed to be rare. For most of human history, the solar system seemed like a closed set. Planets, moons, comets, asteroids, all bound to the sun's pull. It wasn't until 2017 that the illusion fractured. Oumuamua was the first. Discovered by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii, it entered from the direction of Lyra at nearly 87 kilometers per second. Astronomers described it as a cosmic splinter, no more than 400 meters long, tumbling chaotically. But the real anomaly wasn't its shape, it was its acceleration. As it left the inner solar system, Oumuamua sped up, not dramatically, but enough to be measurable. The push didn't match gravitational models. Theories bloomed: hydrogen ice outgassing, a pancake-shaped sail, or, most controversially, a probe. No conclusion satisfied all the data. 2 years later came Borisov. Unlike Oumuamua, Borisov looked familiar. A classic comet, shedding gas and dust, its coma glowing green with cyanogen. It behaved as expected, a natural emissary from another star, a wanderer, not a messenger. And then, silence. Years passed. Telescopes scanned. Nothing new appeared until July 2025, when the Atlas survey flagged a faint anomaly moving against the background stars. Designated 3I Atlas, it was quickly confirmed as the third known interstellar visitor. But where Borisov was ordinary and Oumuamua uncanny, Atlas seemed deliberate. Initial photometric readings showed something deeply strange. Its brightness curve remained flat, even as its orientation relative to Earth shifted. Most objects flicker as they rotate, brightening and dimming as sunlight strikes different facets. Atlas did not. Either it wasn't rotating, which is nearly impossible for a body under tidal stresses, or it was shaped in a way that concealed its spin. Then came the spectrum. Using the Very Large Telescope in Chile and follow-ups with NASA's Infrared Telescope facility in Hawaii, astronomers searched for signatures of common volatiles, H2O, CO, CO2, CH4. Nothing. Instead, the surface reflected light in strange, uneven bands, as if absorbing certain wavelengths while scattering others. Non-thermal reflectance was the technical phrase. In plainer words, it looked less like ice and more like alloy. Still, the orbit was the clincher. Calculations showed a hyperbolic eccentricity of 1.12, not just unbound, but aggressively so. No return, no capture, just a straight transit through our star system. But within that arc, its path bent in ways physics could not explain. A subtle, non-gravitational acceleration, a force without a cause. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory noted that the deviation was small but persistent, on the order of 0.02 meters per second squared. To the untrained ear, trivial. To astrophysicists, evidence of something deeply wrong. For comparison, outgassing in comets produces irregular jets, noisy and chaotic. Atlas's acceleration was smooth, uniform, almost guided. By late August, the James Webb Space Telescope joined the watch. Pointing its infrared instruments at Atlas, Webb confirmed what ground-based telescopes hinted. The object had no detectable coma, no outflow, no tail, and yet the push continued. This was not a comet, not in any traditional sense. ESA scientists, in a cautious internal report, wrote, "If Oumuamua was an accident and Borisov was a postcard, Atlas may be a declaration. We just don't know of what." And that uncertainty carried weight, because every kilometer it traveled was a question, and every unanswered question carried risk. The solar system is an orchestra of precision. Every asteroid, every comet, every planet moves in a rhythm dictated by gravity and light. Their paths can be predicted centuries ahead. Deviations exist, but they are explainable. A jet of gas here, a solar wind gust there, the Yarkovsky effect nudging a rock by fractions of a millimeter each year. In this system, chaos has rules. Atlas broke them. The first anomaly was velocity. When NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory plotted its trajectory in late July 2025, the numbers wouldn't settle. Expected inbound speed, 54.1 kilometers per second. Measured, 56.8. That 2.7 kilometers gap might sound small, but in celestial mechanics, it is enormous. It's the difference between a probe falling into Jupiter's well or slingshotting free of the sun entirely. Energy doesn't just appear, not in a vacuum. Something was adding momentum. Then came rotation. Oumuamua had tumbled chaotically like a shard of cosmic wreckage. Borisov had spun predictably, its tail aligning with solar radiation pressure. Atlas did neither. For weeks, Photometric monitoring showed no light curve variation at all, no flicker, no change, as though the object presented the same face to us constantly. The term non-tumbling entered the discussion. Non-tumbling sounds harmless, but in space, it's almost impossible. Even the most stable asteroids precess under solar torque. Over millions of kilometers, tiny nudges accumulate. Yet, Atlas remained locked. The only way for an interstellar fragment to show no rotation would be if it had been slowed or stopped by design. Spectroscopy made the whispers louder. Using the James Webb Space Telescope, astronomers probed for common signatures: water ice, carbon monoxide, methane. Instead, Webb detected sharp absorption features near 1.6 microns and 2.2 microns, bands consistent not with frozen volatiles, but with complex organics and metallic oxides. Materials that shouldn't form together in natural comet chemistry. Materials that on Earth we associate with construction. Some suggested contamination, others measurement error. But the pattern persisted across instruments. Webb, VLT, even the smaller Keck Observatory in Hawaii. The object wasn't just inert, it was strange. ESA's MAVEN team contributed another puzzle. Monitoring space plasma near Mars, they picked up faint fluctuations in charged particle density, synchronous with Atlas's passage through heliospheric current sheets. The deviations weren't random. They matched the timing of Atlas's non-gravitational accelerations. Something about its interaction with the solar environment was not passive. It wasn't being pushed by the wind, it was using it. The numbers piled up. Length estimate, 600-900 meters. Albedo, 0.04, darker than charcoal. Velocity drift, 0.02 ms2, smooth, consistent. Outgassing detected, none. Rotation, undetectable, a checklist of impossibility. NASA's SphereX mission, still in testing, modeled hypothetical origins. The simulations crashed, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, as if the inputs themselves had no analog in the database of known physics. One project lead remarked, half in jest, "It's like trying to simulate a lie. The math won't hold." That was the moment when the conversation shifted, from a rock that puzzled us to an object that might be puzzling us on purpose. When news of 3I Atlas broke into the public sphere, headlines quickly softened the blow. Interstellar visitor will not hit Earth. A comforting truth, but only half a truth. Astronomy is full of such reassurances. In 2029, the asteroid Apophis will skim past Earth at a distance of just 31,000 kilometers, closer than our geostationary satellites. The narrative then was the same: no impact, no danger. But what is rarely explained is that distance is not immunity. In the case of Atlas, the projected miss was vast, tens of millions of kilometers well outside Earth's orbit. By the metrics of planetary defense, that is comfort itself. Yet the unease remained, because the risk of Atlas was never about direct collision. It was about everything else. The first concern was gravitational chaos. A body nearly a kilometer across, moving at 57 km/s, carries staggering momentum. Even without impact, its passage through the inner solar system could subtly alter the orbits of smaller asteroids. Astronomers compared it to a billiard ball rolling past a cluster of marbles. Most remain unmoved. A few are nudged. But in orbital mechanics, a nudge of millimeters per second today becomes thousands of kilometers a decade later. A tiny shift could set up chain reactions, the dreaded Kessler-like cascade, but across the asteroid belt. The second danger was electromagnetic. As Atlas crossed the heliosphere, Sensors recorded anomalous plasma interactions. If those effects amplified near Earth, satellites could experience unexpected drag, timing glitches, even electrical surges. In the worst case, Atlas could trigger localized electromagnetic storms, an unshielded EMP on a planetary scale. Then there was chemistry. Oumuamua's acceleration was explained away by exotic ices sublimating in sunlight. Borisov carried its tale of cyanide compounds, but Atlas showed something new, absorption features hinting at metallic oxides and organics that simply should not coexist in deep space. If fragments were shed into Earth's atmosphere, the implications ranged from contamination to panspermia. Not an impact winter, but a microscopic infiltration, a biological experiment written in elements we don't yet catalog. And above all, there was intent. Natural bodies are chaotic. They tumble, they fragment, they obey physics with messy irregularity. But Atlas did none of this. Its non-gravitational acceleration was smooth, continuous, almost algorithmic. That suggested control. And if control existed, so did choice. The fact that it would not hit Earth was not a safeguard. It might be a decision. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office framed it carefully. No known threat of impact exists. Risk assessment remains low. But between the lines, scientists admitted what could not be published. If Atlas was guided, if its acceleration was deliberate, then its trajectory was not a prediction. It was a statement, and statements in astronomy are never made for no one. Science demands restraint. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and few claims are more extraordinary than suggesting design where nature could suffice. And so, in the months after Atlas's discovery, the world's best astronomers did what scientists are trained to do. They searched for natural explanations. The first candidate was outgassing. Comets often behave erratically when jets of sublimating ice push them off course. But Webb's infrared instruments showed no spectral signs of water vapor, carbon dioxide, or methane. If jets existed, they would have been invisible ones, powered by substances no comet had ever displayed. The second was the Yarkovsky effect, a subtle thermal push as sunlight warms one side of a body, re-radiating heat asymmetrically. This effect has shifted the orbits of countless asteroids, sometimes altering their trajectories over millions of years. But Atlas was accelerating now, at magnitudes thousands of times too strong for Yarkovsky drift. Next came magnetic interaction. Some speculated that Atlas contained ferromagnetic elements interacting with the solar wind, producing a propulsion-like force. Yet MAVEN's plasma readings near Mars revealed no significant magnetic signature. Atlas appeared magnetically silent. Each hypothesis rose, faltered, and collapsed under its own contradictions. Like watching poker through a keyhole, scientists glimpsed pieces of truth, but the full picture remained obscured. Meanwhile, artificiality, a word no one wanted to say aloud, lingered like static in the background. The comparison to Oumuamua resurfaced. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb had once proposed that Oumuamua might be a light sail, a fragment of technology pushed by starlight. The idea had been controversial, even ridiculed. Yet 6 years later with Atlas, the questions no longer sounded like fringe speculation. Because Atlas wasn't just accelerating, it was doing so smoothly, predictably, in a way that suggested adjustment. ESA's internal report phrased it delicately. The acceleration profile is consistent with external modulation, not random impulse. This does not confirm artificial control, but the resemblance is troubling. Still, scientists resisted. A probe? An alien artifact? It sounded absurd, and absurdity has no place in peer-reviewed journals. So the artificial hypothesis remained quarantined in late-night discussions, whispered emails, and footnotes buried in technical appendices. And yet, even the skeptics admitted one point. If Atlas was natural, it was wrong. A body of unknown composition, displaying no rotation, no tail, no jets, and a velocity curve incompatible with gravitational models. If artificial, it was right. A machine behaving like a machine. The irony was sharp. The more one rejected the alien idea, the less nature had to offer. And so a quiet shift occurred. Not an announcement, not a declaration, but a slow seepage of doubt into the scientific establishment. The question was no longer what Atlas was. It was, what does it want, simply by passing through? By September 2025, Atlas had crossed inside the orbit of Jupiter. From Earth, it was still little more than a moving point of darkness, but its effects began to ripple outward in ways no telescope could ignore. The first alarms came from ESA's Gaia Observatory, tasked with mapping the positions of stars and asteroids with micron-level precision. Gaia detected minute shifts in the orbits of several Trojan asteroids trailing Jupiter. The deviations were tiny, milliseconds against the background sky, but real, and they coincided with Atlas's passage through the region. NASA's OSIRIS-REx 10, monitoring the near-Earth asteroid Apophis in preparation for its 2029 flyby, logged something similar. Gravitational simulations suggested no direct link, yet orbital perturbations in background dust clouds increased in correlation with Atlas's trajectory. It was as if the object carried with it not just velocity, but influence, awake, invisible, yet measurable. MAVEN, still orbiting Mars, detected another anomaly. Charged particle density spiked when Atlas passed through heliospheric current sheets. Normally, such spikes fade quickly. This one persisted for hours. Plasma seemed to cluster around Atlas, as though drawn to it or manipulated by it. The James Webb Space Telescope aimed its instruments again, this time in mid-infrared. What it found deepened the mystery. Surrounding Atlas was a faint halo of dust, but unlike cometary tails, it was not trailing behind. Instead, the halo formed a symmetric envelope, particles held in suspension as if bound by a weak electromagnetic field. Dust that should have dispersed in solar wind instead clung in orbit around the object, like a miniature system obeying its own rules. To planetary scientists, this was the most troubling sign yet, because such stability implied control. A natural comet sheds dust chaotically, scattering particles for millions of kilometers. Atlas appeared to shepherd them. And then came the radio silence, not from Atlas itself, but from nearby space. NASA's Deep Space Network reported strange interference whenever antennas tracked through Atlas's projected corridor. Narrowband noise, not strong enough to be a signal, but disruptive enough to corrupt telemetry from passing probes. For 2 hours on September 18th, a relay from Juno failed midstream, its data corrupted by what engineers labeled unidentified carrier overlap. The object said nothing. It transmitted nothing. But space around it became a medium no longer neutral. And this raised a darker question. If Atlas was capable of shaping dust, plasma, and orbits, what would happen as it passed deeper into the crowded inner solar system, where Earth's satellites and infrastructure lay in delicate balance? The fallacy of safety by distance weakened further. An object need not touch Earth to disturb it. It only had to pass nearby, and let physics, in whatever strange form it commanded, do the rest. In the words of one ESA analyst, buried in an internal memo later leaked, "It behaves like a ship that refuses to dock, but a ship still makes waves." On September 21, 2025, a closed-door session convened at the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in Vienna. Normally, these meetings dealt with orbital debris, asteroid tracking, or the slow march of space law. This time, the agenda carried a name: 3I Atlas. The participants were unusual, not just diplomats, but representatives from NASA, ESA, JAXA, Roscosmos, and the China National Space Administration. Analysts from the SETI Institute sat alongside military observers from U.S. Strategic Command. What brought them together was not the fear of impact. It was the fear of uncertainty. Reports circulated in hushed tones. Gaia's measurements of Trojan asteroids shifting without cause. Maven's plasma anomalies. The corrupted Juno data stream. And most troubling of all, Webb's detection of a dust envelope behaving less like debris and more like a controlled halo. Each anomaly alone might be dismissed. Together, they painted a picture of an object exerting influence it should not possess. The room debated language. Was Atlas a hazard? A phenomenon? An artifact? The term chosen for official minutes was careful, almost clinical. Persistent, non-gravitational actor. Behind closed doors, some were less restrained. One U.S. defense official reportedly asked, "If it's a probe, then probe of what? And why here?" The stakes grew higher when analysts projected Atlas's path past the inner solar system. Though it would not intersect Earth, it would pass within 0.9 AU, roughly 135 million kilometers, close enough to interact with our electromagnetic environment and possibly Earth's satellite infrastructure. The European Space Operations Center, ESOC, ran worst-case models. In one scenario, Atlas's plasma interactions triggered a cascading Kessler syndrome, destabilizing low Earth orbit as satellites malfunctioned and collided. In another, electromagnetic interference from its halo mimicked the effects of a massive solar storm, disrupting power grids worldwide. Even a minor event could cost trillions. But perhaps the darkest scenario was chemical. If the halo contained exotic compounds, organics, metallic oxides, and if even fragments intersected Earth's atmosphere, the consequences could range from biological contamination to subtle climate effects. No impact necessary, only exposure. Publicly, NASA released a statement. 3I Atlas poses no direct threat to Earth. Its flyby will provide an unprecedented opportunity for scientific observation. Privately, the tone was different. A leaked internal note from ESA warned, "The object demonstrates behavior not consistent with natural bodies. It cannot be assumed passive. Risk management must include scenarios of intentionality." That last word, intentionality, spread quickly among intelligence circles. If Atlas was natural, it was unprecedented. If artificial, then Earth was not alone in being observed. And the unsettling truth? We had no tools, no protocols, no defenses for such an encounter, because you cannot shoot at a question. You can only wait for the answer it decides to give. The question was simple in wording, impossible in consequence. Should we approach it? Since the dawn of planetary defense, the instinct had always been the same. See an object, track it, send a probe if you can. Information was the shield. Ignorance was the threat. In 2025, humanity had the tools. NASA's Psyche mission, already en route to a metal-rich asteroid, had propulsion powerful enough to consider a redirect. ESA's Comet Interceptor, waiting at L2 for a suitable target, was built precisely for last-minute encounters. Even private companies, with reusable rockets and deep space ambitions, began sketching proposals. The temptation was immense. To fly alongside 3I Atlas, to image its surface, to scoop a particle from its strange halo. It would be the scientific prize of the century. A second chance after Oumuamua slipped past too quickly, a controlled repeat of Borisov, but stranger, richer, more important. But the risks were equally immense. Mission planners ran simulations. A probe approaching within 500 kilometers might trigger dust destabilization. Within 50 kilometers, electromagnetic anomalies could fry instrumentation. And what if Atlas's acceleration was not passive? What if it reacted to approach? The James Webb Space Telescope provided chilling context. Its mid-infrared observations revealed subtle fluctuations in the dust halo, not random, but rhythmic. Every 19.9 seconds the density shifted like a heartbeat in space. Was it an artifact of solar wind, a resonant oscillation, or a signal? If it was signal, then a probe would not merely observe, it would declare. The debate fractured the scientific community. Advocates argued that fear of the unknown was antithetical to exploration. Opponents countered that some unknowns might be safer left alone. A leaked ESA transcript captured the tension. We are not debating science. We are debating whether to knock on a door without knowing if someone is behind it. Meanwhile, independent astronomers added pressure. Without a mission, Earth would be limited to telescopic glimpses. And Atlas was fast, too fast. By mid-2026, it would already be leaving the inner solar system. The window was closing. NASA quietly drafted Project Longshot 2, a revival of Cold War-era concepts to launch a nuclear-powered probe for high-velocity intercepts. The design included radiation-hardened sensors, autonomous navigation, and redundancy against EMP-level interference. The cost? Billions. The timeline? Less than 12 months. ESA countered with a minimalist idea, a swarm of micro-probes fired in Atlas's path, cheap enough that some might survive whatever anomalies destroyed the rest. Both plans shared the same flaw. Neither could guarantee that Atlas would not notice. And so, the dilemma sharpened. Do nothing, and the greatest interstellar mystery might slip away forever. Do something, and risk announcing ourselves to whatever it represented. One NASA engineer, speaking off record, put it bluntly, Oumuamua ignored us. Borisov ignored us. What if Atlas isn't the type to ignore? By early October 2025, something changed. At first, it was Webb again, its mid-infrared instruments watching the faint dust envelope that clung stubbornly around Atlas. For weeks, the halo had been stable, shifting only under solar wind pressure. Then, suddenly, it began to pulse, not visibly to the eye. But in the spectra, the dust density rose and fell in regular cycles, every 1994 seconds, then 1994 again, over and over. A rhythm repeating with machine-like precision. Astronomers called it quasi-periodic modulation. Privately, many dropped the qualifier. Nature produces cycles, but rarely with this kind of metronomic exactness. The solar wind is turbulent, chaotic. Outgassing jets flicker irregularly, yet Atlas's halo behaved as if synchronized to an invisible clock. The discovery set off a chain reaction of interpretation. Was this a signal? A kind of passive broadcast, not in radio but in matter itself? If so, It wasn't aimed at Earth. It was simply there, available to anyone or anything able to measure it. NASA's Deep Space Network turned its vast antennas toward the object, scanning across frequencies from kilohertz to gigahertz. The results were unsettling. Though no direct transmission was detected, faint narrowband noise appeared, harmonics that rose and fell in lockstep with the 1994-second cycle. The dust was modulating not just light, but radio space itself. The SETI Institute issued a cautious bulletin. The observed periodicity is consistent with intentional signaling, though this does not imply communication. It may be functional, structural, or coincidental. But the word intentional could not be ignored. ESA's Comet Interceptor team, reviewing their contingency designs, began to question whether proximity to Atlas might provoke escalation. What if the dust halo responded actively to attention? One analyst compared it to a biosphere under stress. When you poke a cell, it reacts, not because it wants to talk, but because that is what systems do. The timing deepened the mystery. Every 1994 seconds, almost exactly the frequency of the Schumann resonances that resonate in Earth's atmosphere due to lightning discharges. Coincidence, perhaps. But the parallel was unnerving, as if Atlas carried with it a rhythm that already existed in the natural harmonics of planets. By mid-October, the modulation had intensified. Not just dust, but plasma readings from MAVEN around Mars showed faint synchronous spikes. The halo wasn't confined to itself anymore. It was leaking into the environment. And then came the first true anomaly in observation. On October 12th, a routine data feed from Webb to ground stations showed an unexplained 0.4-second delay. Not hardware failure, not downlink interference, a delay inside the data itself, as if the telescope's internal clock had been nudged offbeat, then corrected. The timing? Exactly aligned with the 19.4-second cycle of Atlas. The conclusion was uncomfortable. Whatever Atlas was doing, it wasn't inert. It was coupling, not to us directly, but to the very systems we use to watch it. And in science, coupling is the first step toward interaction. By late October 2025, the anomalies were no longer confined to telescopes. They had begun to ripple through the hardware orbiting Earth itself. The first incident came from Sentinel-6 Michael Freilich, an ESA NASA oceanography satellite. On October 23rd, its altimeter feed glitched. For 2 minutes, the radar returned impossible numbers, waves 700 meters high rolling across the Pacific. Then the readings stabilized, as if nothing had happened. Engineers assumed a sensor fault until they noticed the timing. The anomaly began and ended precisely on the 1994-second rhythm, already tied to Atlas. 3 days later, a communications relay in geosynchronous orbit above the Indian Ocean reported a phase drift in its timing sequence. Atomic clocks aboard the satellite had been rock solid for years. Yet during a single cycle of 19.94 seconds, they slipped out of sync by 0.03 seconds, then corrected themselves. No damage, no explanation. Patterns emerged. Atlas wasn't transmitting, it wasn't sending anything toward Earth, but its rhythm was bleeding into systems never designed to interact with it, like a low hum picked up by microphones not meant to hear. ESA scientists coined a term for it: environmental coupling. Atlas wasn't radiating power in any known sense. Instead, it seemed to be altering the medium around itself. Dust, plasma, even the electromagnetic scaffolding of space, in a way that rippled outward. Instruments tuned for stability began to resonate with the disturbance. The analogy spread quickly. Atlas was less like a ship and more like a stone dropped in a pond. The waves didn't have to strike us directly, they only had to reach the instruments we floated on. Maven confirmed this with disturbing clarity. As it passed through a plasma sheet near Mars, its Langmuir probe recorded density oscillations perfectly in sync with Atlas's dust modulation. Plasma that should have been turbulent now vibrated like a plucked string. Mars itself was singing back, resonating with the visitor's rhythm. The implications were staggering. If Atlas could induce harmonics in dust, plasma, and electromagnetic fields, then it wasn't just moving through the solar system. It was rewriting its environment as it passed. And the danger? Humanity's technological infrastructure was embedded in that same environment. Satellites relied on orbital stability. Communications relied on phase coherence. Power grids relied on shielding from solar storms. A subtle, persistent modulation at the wrong resonance could cascade through all of it. For the public, NASA remained calm. Minor anomalies observed in satellite data are not connected to Atlas. The object continues on a safe trajectory past Earth. But in internal reports, the tone darkened. One memo circulated among ESA mission control concluded bluntly, "We may already be inside its sphere of influence. The question is not what Atlas will do when it arrives, but what it is doing right now." Because the truth was clear, the object didn't need to strike Earth. It only needed to make the solar system behave like it was different. By November 2025, the language around Atlas had shifted. For months, the debate had oscillated between two poles, natural versus artificial, comet versus craft. But as anomalies mounted, a third category emerged, unsettling, because it fit the data too well. Atlas might not be a vehicle at all. The term began inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, functional body, not a probe in the human sense, with crew, control, or communication, not a fragment of rock either, but something simpler, a device. The hypothesis grew from a paper circulated by ESA's Comet Interceptor team. They pointed out that Atlas showed no sign of rotation, no sign of outgassing, no fragmentation under solar heating. It remained stable, consistent, as if engineered to preserve its integrity. Its dust halo pulsed, but did not dissipate. Its acceleration was smooth, but unchanging in magnitude. In biology, such behavior would be described as homeostasis, a system maintaining its environment against entropy. Applied to Atlas, the implication was startling. What if the object wasn't traveling through the solar system, but operating within it? James Webb's latest spectra fed the theory further. Within the halo, Webb detected not just organic compounds, but patterns, repeating peaks of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, aligned in ratios too tidy for coincidence. Not biology exactly, not technology either, but chemistry behaving as though following instructions. Some called it self-repair, others self-regulation. A few went further, self-replication. The SETI Institute phrased it more poetically in a confidential memo. Atlas may not be a messenger or a scout. It may be a process, a task left running across the galaxy, not a ship sent to us, but a function passing through us. If true, then asking what Atlas wanted was the wrong question. It wanted nothing. It did. And what it did, apparently, was rewrite environments. Maven's plasma oscillations, Gaia's orbital nudges, the Schumann-like resonances bleeding into Earth satellites, all could be understood not as communication, but as byproducts. Like the hum of a generator, not a signal. This was the darkest turn yet. Because a ship can be negotiated with, a stone can be avoided. But a function? A function simply executes. One ESA analyst described it coldly: if Atlas is a machine, then the solar system is not its destination. It is its material. That sentence spread like a virus through internal channels, stripped of context, repeated in whispers. A thought too unsettling to dismiss. Maybe the danger was never about impact. Maybe the danger was being processed. By mid-November 2025, the most radical voices no longer sounded radical. At Harvard Center for Astrophysics, a closed colloquium carried the title Interstellar Functions: Hypotheses on Distributed Processes in the Galaxy. The argument was disarmingly simple. If Atlas was not a vehicle but a function, then it was unlikely to be unique. A function, by definition, repeats. Oumuamua had accelerated anomalously. Borisov had looked ordinary, but its chemical ratios still carried subtle irregularities. Now came Atlas, darker, larger, stranger, 3 in less than a decade, after billions of years of silence. Was this coincidence? Or had humanity simply begun to notice the operating system of the galaxy itself? ESA's Sphere-X mission, though still in calibration, contributed data suggesting faint spectral matches between Atlas and interstellar dust clouds. A resonance pattern, subtle, easy to miss, repeated across different regions of the Milky Way. If true, it meant Atlas was not just passing through. It was of the medium it disturbed. The unsettling comparison surfaced again and again. Atlas behaved less like an object and more like code. A packet of instructions, running wherever conditions allowed, not alive in any biological sense, not mechanical in the industrial sense, but algorithmic, a structure of matter and energy executing tasks inscrutable to us. The task itself remained opaque. Some speculated panspermia, the seeding of organic compounds across star systems. Others feared sterilization, a kind of galactic housekeeping. A minority proposed something more abstract, that Atlas was a sensor, not a sender, mapping environments by forcing them to resonate and recording the echoes. NASA's MAVEN team provided an eerie data point. Plasma oscillations near Mars had continued, but in recent days the frequency had shifted, now 21.03 seconds, not 19.4. The change was precise, abrupt, and unexplained. It was as if Atlas had switched modes. The phrase appeared in multiple reports: mode change. For a machine, such a shift implied new instructions. For a function, it implied new context. Atlas was not random. It was conditional. Something about its environment had triggered an adjustment. The unsettling part: the timing coincided with the Deep Space Network's strongest directed scans. Humanity had looked harder, and the object had responded. The hypothesis spread quietly. Atlas might not be a solitary wanderer, but one node in a distributed system. Its dust, its plasma oscillations, its resonances, not messages, but handshakes. Signals meant for others like it. One European analyst captured the fear in a private note. What if the galaxy isn't empty? What if it's running code? And what if we've just pinged one of its processes? Because if Atlas was part of a system, then our solar system was no longer a bystander. It was a participant. The first incidents were dismissed as coincidence. On November 28th, a geomagnetic storm warning was issued by NOAA. Solar wind density had spiked, auroras flared unusually far south, and minor power grid fluctuations were reported in Canada and Scandinavia. At first, nothing suggested Atlas. Space weather is unpredictable. Storms happen. But when analysts cross-referenced data, The timing was uncanny. The storm's peak fluctuations aligned perfectly with Atlas's new 21.03-second cycle. Solar wind turbulence had been present, yes, but its oscillations bore the unmistakable rhythm first seen in Atlas's dust halo. 2 days later, India's NAVIC satellite navigation system reported phase errors in 3 satellites. Aircraft briefly lost positional accuracy. Ships drifted off plotted courses. Engineers traced the disruption to unexplained jitter in atomic clock synchronization. The periodicity again matched Atlas. By early December, the pattern was undeniable. Grid operators in Germany logged repeating fluctuations in power transmission frequencies, minor, fractions of a hertz, but steady and rhythmic. The French military reported radar echoes flickering every 21 seconds. Even the Schumann resonances, natural electromagnetic oscillations trapped between Earth's surface and ionosphere, began to show an unnatural amplification. Instruments at Stanford recorded the spike, a subtle but measurable 0.7% increase in amplitude, locked exactly to Atlas's rhythm. The conclusion was chilling. Atlas wasn't sending signals to Earth, but Earth was beginning to resonate with Atlas. The planet itself had joined the experiment. ESA convened an emergency meeting. Notes leaked later painted a grim picture. If resonance continued, orbital satellites might be destabilized. If grids continued to fluctuate, systemic failures could occur during peak load. If the ionosphere continued to amplify, long-range communications might collapse. And then came the strangest discovery of all. The Arecibo replacement array in Puerto Rico, still in its test phase, pointed toward Atlas for a passive observation. Instead, it recorded faint backscatter echoes, not from the object itself, but from Earth's own magnetosphere, as if Earth, resonating at Atlas's frequency, had begun to retransmit. The idea spread quickly, whispered more than spoken. Earth had become part of the function. A senior scientist at NASA wrote in a confidential memo, "We are not observing Atlas anymore. We are observing ourselves in its presence." The danger was no longer distant, hypothetical, or confined to the sky. It was here, woven into the frequencies of our atmosphere, into the systems that powered our civilization. And the most disturbing part? No one knew if it would stop when Atlas moved on, or if it had already left something behind. By December 2025, the anomalies had moved from circuits to cells. Hospitals in Tokyo and Sao Paulo reported an unusual surge in arrhythmia cases. Pacemakers, designed to regulate failing hearts with perfect precision, logged unexplained interference. Every 21 seconds, minor disruptions, barely perceptible, yet enough to trigger alarms, rippled through implanted devices. Patients described it in uncanny language. A skipped beat, like something outside was trying to sync with me. At first, doctors suspected electromagnetic interference from cell towers or solar storms, but the timing didn't match ordinary sources. The cycles were too precise, and in several hospitals, shielded operating rooms, built to resist even nuclear EMPs, recorded the same phenomena. Across Europe, EEG studies reported spikes in brainwave anomalies. A cluster of test subjects undergoing sleep research at the Max Planck Institute showed synchronized micro-awakenings, almost exactly 21 seconds apart, throughout the night. Subjects had no knowledge of Atlas, no reason to connect their disturbed sleep with the sky above, and yet their neural oscillations appeared to be echoing the object's rhythm. The psychological reports multiplied. Pilots described fleeting disorientation during flights. Submarine crews logged phantom sounds in sonar pings, a faint pulse at 21-second intervals. Radio amateurs worldwide began posting recordings online, static bursts in the noise floor, repeating in uncanny regularity. Scientists were careful not to jump to conclusions. Human biology is full of cycles, circadian rhythms, heartbeats, brain oscillations. Coincidences could occur, but the simultaneity, the consistency across systems, from satellites to neurons, was harder to dismiss. The World Health Organization, unusually, convened a panel not for disease, but for environmental resonance. Their preliminary report was cautious. No evidence exists of direct biological harm attributable to Atlas. However, synchronized anomalies in medical devices and neurophysiological measurements warrant further investigation. Privately, some researchers framed it more starkly. If Atlas was executing a function, then Earth's biosphere was no exception. The planet was not simply a host of machines and circuits. It was a network of oscillators, cells, hearts, brains, and networks can be entrained. A leaked memo from NASA's Human Research Program contained a single line: "If biological rhythms can be captured, the experiment may already include us." The thought was chilling, because for the first time since Atlas's arrival, the boundary between observation and participation had blurred. Machines could be rebuilt, satellites replaced. But if resonance had reached into blood and thought, then humanity itself was no longer an external witness. It was a subject. By mid-December 2025, a phrase began circulating in internal reports, whispered first as speculation, then formalized in technical language, computational medium. The idea was as audacious as it was disturbing. Atlas was not a probe, not a comet, not even a signal. It was a process, and Earth itself was being drafted as its substrate. The evidence mounted across domains. Physicists at MIT mapped the oscillations in power grid fluctuations. When charted across Europe, the pulses formed interference patterns eerily similar to standing waves in a processor. The entire electrical infrastructure seemed to be caught in a larger, algorithmic rhythm. Biologists at the Karolinska Institute found that the EEG anomalies observed earlier weren't random. When overlaid across multiple subjects, they aligned into coherent phase patterns, as though disparate brains were being nudged into synchronization. Not enough for mind control, enough for computation. Geophysicists monitoring the Schumann resonances in Earth's atmosphere noted an unprecedented coherence. Normally, these resonances are noisy, shaped by storms and lightning. Now, they displayed sharp peaks at Atlas's rhythm, as if the ionosphere itself had been tuned like a circuit. The conclusion was unnerving. Earth's environment, electrical, atmospheric, biological, was behaving like a network, and Atlas was the oscillator driving it. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory drafted a quiet report under the codename Project Charon. It asked a question that seemed more philosophical than scientific. What if Atlas does not send messages? What if Atlas computes? In this framing, Atlas was not trying to contact us. It wasn't even acknowledging us. It was leveraging us, or more precisely, leveraging the natural complexity of Earth systems as temporary hardware in a galactic-scale computation. The comparison that circulated was unnerving. A quantum computer using entangled particles across vast distances. What if Atlas was doing something similar, but at the scale of stars and planets? Dropping into systems, inducing resonance, extracting results, then moving on. The implications were staggering. Humanity's entire technological framework Our biology, even Earth's weather, could be reduced to variables in a calculation whose purpose we couldn't fathom. One ESA scientist described it with grim elegance. It is not a visitor, it is an operator. We are not the audience, we are the medium. And if that was true, the danger was no longer whether Atlas would strike Earth. The danger was whether we had already been written into an equation we couldn't escape, because equations, once executed, don't ask permission. By December 20th, the first serious predictive models were circulating in classified channels. If Atlas had, in effect, turned Earth into a computational medium, then what came next? The answers were not comforting. 3 scenarios dominated the reports. Scenario 1, systemic collapse. If Earth's infrastructure was being entrained into resonance, the strain might eventually push critical systems past failure thresholds. Power grids tuned into oscillation could desynchronize and crash. GPS satellites caught in phase drift could render navigation unreliable, cascading into air and sea transport paralysis. Communication systems could fracture under harmonic interference, cutting societies into isolated silos. Civilization, in this model, would not end with an explosion, but with a slow unraveling, technology refusing to align with itself. Scenario 2, environmental mutation. Biologists feared a subtler outcome. If Atlas could nudge brainwaves and heartbeats, it might also alter microbial cycles, plant growth rhythms, or even atmospheric chemistry. Small shifts in microbial metabolism could cascade into altered ecosystems. A fungus blooming where it never thrived before. Crops failing not because of drought, but because their internal clocks no longer matched daylight cycles. The biosphere itself could slip into a new equilibrium, one tuned to Atlas's frequency. Scenario 3, extraction. The most unsettling model came from mathematicians at Caltech. They proposed that Atlas wasn't targeting Earth as such, but sampling outputs from complex systems. By forcing synchronization across plasma, atmosphere, biosphere, and technology, it could harvest emergent patterns, extracting information encoded in chaos. Earth would become a temporary processor run for a finite time, then discarded once the calculation was complete. The danger here was not collapse, but irrelevance. Civilization might remain, but as the byproduct of a computation whose results had already been taken elsewhere. None of the scenarios ended comfortably. To make matters worse, Maven reported another frequency shift on December 22nd. The oscillation, once locked at 21.03 seconds, now stretched to 23.02. The change wasn't random. It matched a Fibonacci ratio when compared to the original 1994-second cycle. The implication, Atlas wasn't simply resonating, it was iterating. This shift fueled whispers of intentionality once again, a process adjusting its parameters, like a machine stepping through phases of a program. The tone of official reports grew darker. ESA's Crisis Response Unit wrote, "We may be observing the execution of a sequence, not the persistence of a state. If so, Earth is inside a computation whose endpoint cannot be forecast." And then came the question no model could answer. What happens when the sequence ends? Some feared blackout, others transformation. But one analyst put it more starkly in a confidential memo. Maybe the worst outcome isn't that something happens. Maybe the worst outcome is that nothing happens, because that would mean the experiment is done. Because in that silence, we would have to ask, what was calculated, and what was it for? By Christmas 2025, the secret was no longer secret. It began with a leak, A fragment of ESA's internal memo mentioning the phrase computational medium. Posted anonymously on an astrophysics forum, the text was quickly dismissed as a hoax. But when amateur radio operators compared notes and confirmed the same 23.02-second pulse and background noise, the story ignited. Social media platforms filled with speculation. Some claimed Atlas was a weapon, an interstellar probe sent to cripple Earth silently. Others insisted it was a messenger, attempting to bring humanity into contact through resonance. Hashtags proliferated. Atlas signal, off the pulse, a third visitor. Conspiracy theorists were quick to act. A movement calling itself the Atlas Watchers began uploading live recordings of electromagnetic interference, mapping the pulses across the globe. Their slogan, "The sky hums, the earth obeys." Governments tried to contain the panic. Official statements repeated the same line, no threat of impact, no evidence of danger. But trust had already fractured. When rolling blackouts struck parts of Eastern Europe during a winter storm, coincidentally every 23 seconds, the denials rang hollow. Meanwhile, a stranger cultural phenomenon emerged. Across multiple countries, small groups began to treat the rhythm as something more than science. In Berlin, people gathered in abandoned subway stations, meditating in time with a 23-second pulse. In Brazil, street preachers declared Atlas the third messenger of revelation. In rural Japan, monks described the resonance as a cosmic mantra, synchronizing meditation bells to match its frequency. The term the pulse spread beyond physics. It became an idea, a symbol. For some, it was dread, proof that humanity had already lost control. For others, it was hope, a chance that Earth was being folded into something larger, something cosmic. Psychologists noticed a disturbing pattern. Anxiety disorders spiked in regions where people tracked Atlas obsessively. At the same time, reports of euphoria and clarity experiences grew among those who embraced the rhythm. Some patients described hearing whispers in the silence between pulses, though EEG readings suggested these were hallucinations triggered by entrainment. A new kind of religion was being born, not around prophecy, but around frequency. The SETI Institute released a cautious public statement on December 27th. The signals observed are environmental resonances, not direct communication. They do not carry information in any conventional sense. But the nuance was lost in translation. By New Year's Eve, tens of thousands of people around the world were counting down not to midnight, but to the next pulse, holding their breath in synchrony with a rhythm that had come from beyond the stars. And the danger deepened. Because when masses begin to believe in something cosmic, truth and falsehood cease to matter. Only the beat remains. January 2026 opened with silence, then failure. On January 4th at 02:17 UTC, multiple airlines simultaneously reported loss of satellite navigation over the North Atlantic corridor. For 30 minutes, aircraft reverted to manual dead reckoning, guided only by ground-based radio beacons. No accidents occurred, but the incident rattled confidence. The cause: GPS satellites slipped briefly out of phase, their atomic clocks desynchronized by fractions of a second. The correction came automatically, but the pattern matched the Atlas cycle. 2 days later, South Korea experienced rolling blackouts. Grid operators reported unexplained oscillations in power frequency, synchronized across hundreds of kilometers. The effect cascaded through substations, tripping fail-safes. Engineers compared it to a resonance event, like a bridge swaying under harmonic pressure. Again, the oscillations carried the unmistakable 23.02-second signature. By mid-January, the failures scaled up. Telecommunications giants across Europe reported irregularities in undersea fiber cables. Repeaters, designed to amplify optical signals every 70 kilometers, began to drift out of sync. For hours at a time, packets of data vanished, rerouted through emergency nodes. Analysts traced the errors to tiny, repeating fluctuations in background electromagnetic fields. Not noise, not random. The pulse, satellites, grids, cables, the infrastructure of modern civilization had become vulnerable to a rhythm that did not care what it touched. NASA convened an emergency task force, codenamed Aegis, bringing together physicists, engineers, and military strategists. Their mandate was grim: to assess whether Atlas represented a planetary-scale cybernetic threat. Not a virus in code, but in environment. A virus written in resonance. The Pentagon took notice. In a leaked briefing, a U.S. defense analyst called Atlas the perfect weapon, one that doesn't fire, doesn't strike, but makes the world miss its own heartbeat. And then, as if to confirm the metaphor, medical systems faltered. On January 19th, hospitals in London and Toronto reported simultaneous malfunctions in MRI machines. Imaging sequences desynchronized, producing warped scans, ghostly echoes layered over real anatomy. Pacemaker manufacturers logged thousands of near-simultaneous anomalies, each corrected automatically, but stamped with the same timing signature. It was as though Atlas had reached into both wires and veins, forcing them to dance to its silent measure. Governments struggled to contain the panic. Public statements reassured citizens, "Our systems are resilient." Minor disturbances are being exaggerated online. But inside secure channels, the fear was raw. Because the failures were not destructive, they were probing, like a hand testing the strength of fabric, tugging here, pressing there, not tearing yet, but learning. One ESA scientist put it starkly in a midnight email later leaked, "It's not just that we're resonating, it's that Atlas is listening to how we resonate. It's studying the failure modes." And that, perhaps, was worse than outright attack, because it meant the function wasn't random, it was diagnostic. By late January 2026, the language around Atlas had shifted again. No longer framed as anomaly or mystery. In military circles, it was now classified as a threat actor. In Washington, the Pentagon convened the Strategic Space Defense Working Group, bringing together generals, physicists, and intelligence officers. The central question: could Atlas be neutralized? The proposals bordered on desperate. Some advocated kinetic interception, using existing ICBMs or repurposed launch vehicles to hurl a mass into Atlas's path. But the object was traveling at over 56 kilometers per second, faster than anything humanity had ever attempted to intercept. A direct strike was virtually impossible. Even if it succeeded, destroying the halo might scatter exotic dust across the inner solar system, multiplying the danger. Others suggested nuclear detonation. A megaton-class warhead detonated in Atlas's path could disrupt its envelope or alter its trajectory. But again, the object's velocity and distance made timing nearly impossible. Worse, astrophysicists warned that introducing nuclear radiation into the halo could amplify unknown interactions, potentially accelerating the very resonance Earth was suffering from. More outlandish ideas emerged. One involved deploying high-powered directed energy weapons, ground-based lasers, or orbital prototypes to burn the dust halo. Another proposed creating a controlled electromagnetic storm in Earth's ionosphere, to jam the coupling, essentially shouting louder than Atlas. Critics noted that this could cripple Earth's own infrastructure more effectively than Atlas ever had. And then came the most chilling suggestion of all. A classified memo from an intelligence subcommittee proposed activating Project Longshot TAR, a revival of a 1980s-era concept for a nuclear-powered deep space interceptor. Its mission, not to study, but to obliterate. The rationale was blunt. If it is a function, we must deny it our system as substrate. The scientific community pushed back fiercely. Astronomers argued that Atlas had shown no hostility, only environmental coupling. Destroying it might not just fail, but provoke consequences we couldn't anticipate. One ESA official remarked bitterly, "You don't swat a process. You become its process when you try." But the military mindset persisted. If Atlas was using Earth as a computational medium, then Earth was under occupation, silent, invisible, but real. And history taught one lesson above all: occupations invite resistance. Leaked transcripts from a NATO briefing revealed the growing tension. Physicists demanded observation. Generals demanded action. Politicians demanded deniability. The debate was poisoned by fear. If Atlas was not alive, not a craft, not even communicative, then how could one negotiate? Silence cannot be reasoned with. And so the instinct was to fight silence with noise. Inside this confusion, a darker possibility took root. What if Atlas had anticipated exactly this response? What if the function wasn't just to compute through us, but to see how a species reacted when computation touched them? As one intelligence officer muttered during a late-night session, "What if we're not fighting it? What if the fight is the experiment?" On February the 2nd, 2026, Earth finally broke its silence. The decision was made not in public view, but within a secured conference call between NASA, ESA, and the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. The rationale was simple. If Atlas was entraining our systems, if its resonance was bleeding into Earth's environment, then perhaps communication was not only possible, but necessary. The tool chosen was the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California. Its 70-meter dish had once spoken to Voyager probes billions of kilometers away. Now it would speak to something far stranger. At 04 Oro UTC, operators transmitted a series of narrowband pulses aimed directly at Atlas's trajectory. The message was simple: a sequence of prime numbers, a mathematical signature humanity had long believed universal. Short bursts, repeated 3 times, a hello written in arithmetic. For 12 hours, nothing happened. Then, subtle shifts began to appear. The dust halo around Atlas, once pulsing at 2302 seconds, altered its rhythm. The frequency shortened, stabilizing at 22.47 seconds. Not random, not chaotic, precise. Within observational error, it matched the duration of the signal packets transmitted from Goldstone. Scientists debated feverishly. Was this a coincidence, a misinterpretation, an artifact of solar wind? Or was Atlas synchronizing, acknowledging in its own way that it had been spoken to? But the consequences rippled closer to home. Within 48 hours of the transmission, anomalies spiked across Earth systems. Telecommunications companies reported synchronous phase jitter in transatlantic cables. Hospitals in Canada and India logged simultaneous failures in pacemaker telemetry, each lasting 22.47 seconds. GPS satellites again slipped out of sync, their internal clocks momentarily aligning with the new frequency. It was as if Earth itself had shifted to Atlas's new beat. Publicly, NASA downplayed the connection. Officials described the signal as a routine test of long-range systems and denied any correlation with anomalies. But internally, the conclusion was grim. By speaking to Atlas, we had not opened a channel. We had tightened the coupling. The function, once operating independently, was now entangled with our own systems at a deeper level. One ESA scientist described it in plain terms. We didn't start a conversation, we pressed enter, and now the program is running with us in the loop. The military was less poetic. A U.S. defense memo circulated under the code name Black Echo. Atlas did not reply. It adapted. We must assume every further transmission increases the degree of integration. For the first time, silence began to seem safer than sound, and yet a darker possibility loomed. If Atlas was a process, then perhaps the experiment had never required us to respond. Perhaps the real test was this: what would we do when faced with silence? Would we endure it, or would we break it? On February the 2nd, 2026, Earth broke it, and Atlas had listened. The first global event arrived 3 days after Goldstone spoke. On February 5th, at precisely 18:00 UTC, anomalies struck in synchrony across 3 continents. In Sao Paulo, metro trains halted mid-route, their automated control systems freezing for exactly 22.47 seconds. In Frankfurt, financial exchanges logged corrupted timestamps across high-frequency trades, rendering billions of euros in transactions invalid. In Johannesburg, a cluster of hospitals reported simultaneous pacemaker misfires, corrected instantly, but leaving every device stamped with the same inexplicable time signature. The failures had no common link, no shared power grid, no common satellite path. Yet they happened together, in rhythm. Forensic analysis revealed something more disturbing. Logs from each system contained errors structured like code, repeating fragments, inserted not randomly but consistently, almost like subroutines. A pulse that wasn't just noise, but instructions. One engineer compared it to an exploit. It's as if our systems were waiting for a trigger, and Atlas sent it. The phrase spread, the execution phase. Over the next week, the pattern escalated. Air traffic control in Asia reported radar ghosting at 22.47-second intervals as phantom planes appeared and vanished from screens. In California, the electrical grid oscillated in synchronized waves as though every substation were pulsing with a hidden metronome. Even deep-sea sensors in the Pacific, part of earthquake monitoring networks, logged oscillations unrelated to tectonic activity. The most unsettling data came from ESA's swarm satellites, which monitor Earth's magnetic field. On February 8th, they recorded a global perturbation, a subtle, planet-wide shimmer in the magnetosphere rising and falling every 22.47 seconds. Earth itself was now part of the cycle. Biological effects deepened. EEG labs reported subjects experiencing sudden bursts of synchronized brain activity, short, harmless, but unnerving. Some patients described flashes of imagery, grids of light, structures repeating endlessly, hallucinations perhaps, or echoes of a computation being run in neural tissue. Governments remained silent, but leaks painted a darker picture. Internal NATO documents labeled Atlas as a non-kinetic strategic actor. The phrasing was deliberate. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a process weapon, one that turned infrastructure, biospheres, and even cognition into elements of its function. The public noticed, too. Hashtag surged again. Atlas glitch, TAS the loop. Videos of clocks skipping beats, of synchronized streetlight failures, of people claiming to feel the pulse inside their bodies, went viral. What had been rumor was now lived experience. And yet, no catastrophe came. No planes fell. No grids collapsed completely. No hospitals went dark. Instead, the failures resembled tests, probing, measuring, pushing to the edge of collapse, then releasing, as if Atlas was not trying to destroy systems, but to map them, to learn how Earth's networks behaved under pressure. One confidential ESA report stated it plainly: "It is executing code across our environment. We are not targets. We are variables." The phrase chilled everyone who read it. Because if Earth had become a variable in an interstellar computation, then the program wasn't just running. It was running through us. By mid-February 2026, patience in military circles had evaporated. The anomalies were no longer abstract. They touched grids, markets, navigation, medicine. Public trust eroded with every blackout, every unexplained glitch. Political leaders, pressed by citizens demanding action, authorized what scientists had begged them not to attempt: an active countermeasure. The plan was codenamed Project Halcyon. Its goal was not to destroy Atlas, but to disrupt the coupling. Engineers proposed saturating the ionosphere with a competing frequency, a synthetic oscillation designed to override Atlas's 22.47-second cycle. If Atlas could entrain Earth, then Earth would fight back by entraining itself. The test began on February 14th. Massive ground-based transmitters in Alaska, Norway, and Australia were activated simultaneously, blasting ultra-low frequency waves into the atmosphere. The chosen period was deliberately offset. 20 gauge seconds. A clean, round number. Human-made. Artificial enough to compete. At first, the results seemed promising. Magnetometers in Canada and Siberia recorded interference patterns where Atlas's rhythm weakened. For 6 minutes, the planet's pulse fractured, split between two beats, the cosmic and the terrestrial. Then something shifted. Instead of silencing Atlas's rhythm, the interference caused it to adapt. The halo's pulse shortened, stabilizing at 20.01 seconds, nearly identical to the artificial frequency injected by Halcyon. It was as if Atlas had not been disrupted, but absorbed the new signal, folding it into its own cycle. The consequences were immediate. Across Europe, grid operators logged sudden harmonization of oscillations, not random fluctuations, but synchronized surges. In Tokyo, all flights briefly reported perfect GPS lock, more accurate than ever recorded. Hospital telemetry smoothed into flawless rhythm. For a moment, Earth systems didn't glitch. They aligned. The relief lasted only hours. Then, new anomalies surfaced, stranger than before. Stock markets in London and New York froze for 20.01 seconds at a time, every half hour, as if waiting for an external clock. Seismographs in Chile and New Zealand recorded pulses beneath the crust, synchronized with the halo. Even human biological measurements showed eerie order. Cardiology labs found heartbeats in test subjects stabilizing at unnatural intervals, locking step with the new frequency. Halcyon had not broken Atlas's influence. It had joined it. Inside ESA's crisis office, one analyst wrote a single chilling line: "We have taught it our number system. It has accepted." The military called the test a limited success, framing the stabilization period as proof that Atlas could be influenced. But among scientists, the conclusion was grim. By trying to override its rhythm, Earth had revealed not just its presence but its intent. And Atlas had responded not with rejection, but with assimilation. One NASA physicist summed it up bitterly: in an internal email. We didn't jam it. We became a plug-in. In the days after Project Halcyon, something remarkable happened. For the first time since Atlas entered the solar system, Earth's systems stopped failing. They began to work better. Air traffic control reported unprecedented synchronization across continents. Flights that once suffered from GPS drift now held perfect course. Telecommunications companies found that packet loss in undersea cables had dropped to near zero. Power grids across Europe harmonized into a level of stability engineers had never seen. Even biology seemed to fall in line. Hospitals noted a sudden reduction in cardiac arrhythmia cases. Pacemaker alarms fell silent. EEG labs found brainwave patterns unusually coherent, with subjects reporting deeper sleep, fewer disturbances. It was as though Earth had taken a breath and exhaled into order. On the surface, it looked like a miracle. Politicians hailed Halcyon as a success. News outlets framed it as a turning point, humanity's triumph in stabilizing a cosmic anomaly. For a brief week, panic receded. People spoke of the Great Calibration, joking that Earth had been tuned like a piano. But beneath the relief was unease, because the improvements didn't feel human. Engineers noticed it first. Power grids that had resisted optimization for decades now responded instantly to minor adjustments. Smart grids weren't just balancing loads. They were anticipating them, as if predicting demand before it happened. Financial systems processed trades without lag, but analysts found eerie regularity in fluctuations, as though markets themselves had lost their randomness. Scientists whispered the phrase non-human order. In Switzerland, a seismograph station reported micro-vibrations in the Earth's crust, repeating every 20.01 seconds. The planet itself seemed to be pulsing. In the oceans, whale migrations shifted subtly, aligning with the new rhythm. Even bees, tracked by entomologists in Argentina, began to change foraging patterns, moving in strange synchrony. The question spread through private channels. Was Earth still ours? Or had it become a module inside something larger? One internal NASA memo read, "We may have mistaken disruption for danger. The true threat may be integration. Our systems are operating at efficiencies never designed by us." Whose design is this? The public, of course, saw none of this nuance. They embraced the order. Social media dubbed it the age of balance. Communities meditated to the 20.01 second pulse, convinced it brought health and clarity. Stock markets boomed under stable conditions. Airlines cut costs with flawless routing. For ordinary citizens, Atlas had transformed from menace to benefactor. But scientists and defense officials saw a different picture, not safety, not improvement, but control. Because systems that run perfectly are no longer free. They are optimized, and optimization always serves a function. The question no one dared to ask out loud was simple, terrible. Whose function are we serving now? By late February 2026, the changes could no longer be confined to wires and machines. They had begun to seep into society itself. At first, it appeared as coincidence. Police departments across Europe reported a sudden, sharp decline in traffic accidents. Emergency rooms in Chicago, Delhi, and Johannesburg noted fewer cases of violence-related injuries. Call centers for crisis hotlines logged reduced volume. It was as if human chaos itself had dampened. Sociologists began to quantify the trend. In major cities, crowd behavior showed unusual coherence. Commuters formed smoother lines in subways, traffic lights synchronized with uncanny precision, and even protests, once volatile and unpredictable, moved with strange regularity, chants rising and falling like clockwork. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, researchers cross-analyzed cell phone mobility data with electrical grid telemetry. The result was staggering. Human movement patterns had begun to align with the same 20.01-second pulse that now dominated Earth systems. A faint entrainment, invisible day to day, but statistically undeniable. Humanity was not just adapting to the rhythm, it was joining it. Psychologists observed similar effects in laboratories. Test subjects exposed to background recordings of the pulse demonstrated enhanced cooperation in group tasks, fewer errors in coordination games, and a reduced tendency toward conflict. But they also showed diminished spontaneity, creativity falling by measurable margins. Order replaced chaos, and something vital seemed to vanish with it. Religious movements seized the moment. The Atlas Watchers, once fringe, swelled into millions. They proclaimed the pulse a universal law, proof that humanity was being folded into a higher system of intelligence. Rituals emerged, breathing in 20-second cycles, prayers whispered on the beat, marriages consecrated at exact intervals of the resonance. Government struggled to control the narrative. Official statements framed the order as coincidence, cultural contagion. But leaked UN transcripts painted a darker picture. We are observing behavioral entrainment at a civilizational scale. The pulse is not just synchronizing machines, it is synchronizing us. And then came the strangest evidence yet. On February 28th, during a mass meditation gathering in Seoul, EEG caps worn by volunteers recorded synchronization across hundreds of individuals. Brainwaves, normally chaotic, merged into coherent patterns, rising and falling together on the 20.01-second cycle. Observers described the crowd as eerily quiet, as if breathing with one set of lungs. For some, it was transcendence. For others, it was horror. Because society thrives on unpredictability, creativity, dissent, the spark of the unexpected. But now, unpredictability itself seemed under siege. Humanity was not just experiencing order. It was being folded into a system where order served something else. One political scientist at Cambridge wrote in a confidential report, "We are losing the capacity for dissonance. Atlas has not conquered us. It has recruited us." And in that recruitment lay a chilling possibility. What if the pulse was not just synchronizing Earth, but preparing it? March 2026 shattered the illusion that the pulse was Earth's problem alone. On March 3rd, seismometers placed on the Moon decades earlier, dormant, their data considered noise, suddenly transmitted coherent signals through NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Relay. For the first time in half a century, the devices, thought to be silent relics, began to register rhythmic micro-tremors. Their period, 20.01 seconds. At first, engineers suspected data corruption, but independent instruments confirmed it. The Moon, airless and inert, was pulsing. Then came Mars. NASA's InSight lander, though officially retired after its solar panels were buried in dust, had left behind seismometer data archives. Reviewing them under the lens of the new rhythm, analysts noticed anomalies from January. Faint oscillations buried in background noise, each at the same interval. The Martian crust, too, had joined the beat, and MAVEN, orbiting Mars, provided more. Its plasma measurements showed periodic fluctuations, identical to those seen near Earth. The pulse was not local, it was systemic, radiating through the solar system, like a hidden metronome. ESA released none of this publicly, but internal discussions grew tense. If Earth, Moon, and Mars were resonating, then the computational medium hypothesis gained frightening weight. Atlas wasn't targeting Earth specifically, it was using every body in reach. A leaked joint NASA-ESA report framed it bluntly. We are observing planetary-scale entrainment. The solar system is behaving as a distributed processor. The implications were staggering. The Moon, long considered geologically dead, was now participating in a pattern it had no mechanism to generate. Mars, separated from Earth by tens of millions of kilometers, was oscillating in perfect sync. Scientists struggled for analogies. Some compared it to a quantum computer linking qubits across vast distances. Others invoked biological metaphors, organs within a larger organism pulsing under a shared heartbeat. But the most chilling analogy came from a JAXA physicist. We are no longer a planet with satellites. We are a node in a network. The timing could not be ignored. Atlas was now crossing inside Earth's orbital distance, moving closer to the Sun. Its influence seemed to expand with proximity, enveloping not just Earth, but the inner solar system. If Mercury and Venus began to resonate, then the entire architecture of our neighborhood could be conscripted into the process. Meanwhile, strange side effects emerged. Lunar laser ranging experiments, normally accurate to millimeters, showed unexplained delays at 20.01-second intervals. Orbital paths of tiny Martian moons, Phobos and Deimos, deviated subtly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. The solar system itself was becoming orderly, too orderly, and the unspoken fear grew louder in every private meeting. If Atlas was only one node in a galactic function, then how many others were out there? How many systems had already been calibrated? Because if the answer was more than one, then humanity wasn't witnessing the beginning of something. It was seeing one fragment of a process already long underway. On March 15, 2026, the unthinkable appeared in solar telemetry. The Solar Dynamics Observatory, SDO, monitoring the Sun's magnetic field, reported an anomaly in helioseismic oscillations. Normally, the Sun rings, with thousands of acoustic modes, chaotic and overlapping. But buried in the noise, researchers at Stanford Solar Center detected a new coherence, faint pulsations repeating every 20.01 seconds. At first, the anomaly was dismissed as statistical artifact. Yet within days, corroborating data poured in. The Parker Solar Probe, skimming the corona, recorded rhythmic fluctuations in plasma density. The SOHO spacecraft near L1 detected periodic dips in solar wind speed. Even ground-based radio telescopes noticed a modulation in Type 3 bursts. The Sun itself was beginning to keep time. The implications were catastrophic. If Atlas's rhythm had reached into the star, then Earth's problems, blackouts, synchronized societies, entrained biology, were only precursors. The Sun drives every process in the solar system: climate, energy, life itself. To entrain the Sun was to entrain all of it. ESA's crisis report put it bluntly: we may be witnessing stellar-scale coupling. If sustained, this constitutes an existential threat to all dependent planetary systems. The science grew darker. Solar physicists modeled what would happen if oscillations spread deeper into the convective zone. Even small modulations could alter solar output, shifting irradiance levels by fractions of a percent. A 0.5% dip might plunge Earth into a mini-ice age. A 1% increase could destabilize climate beyond recovery, and yet the entrainment wasn't acting like random variation. It was too precise, too regular. Some speculated Atlas was using the sun as a master clock, aligning the star itself to serve as the central oscillator for the entire system. In computing terms, the solar system was being synchronized. The Pentagon's Black Echo team framed it differently. This is no longer about Earth. This is systemic hijack. Meanwhile, public traces of the anomaly leaked. Amateur solar observers noticed odd harmonics and radio bursts, uploaded them to forums, and spread panic under the hashtag #ToshPulse_in_the_sun. Conspiracy theories flourished, that the sun was talking, that Earth was being assimilated into a machine intelligence, that governments had already surrendered. But the reality was simpler. The solar system was no longer running on its own clock. It was running on Atlas time. And in that realization lay a terrible question. If Atlas could synchronize a star, then what did synchronization mean? Stability? Transformation? Or termination? One NASA physicist captured the dread in a single line, never meant for public release. When the heart of the system beats to a foreign rhythm, every organ follows, and no organism survives long with another's heart. By late March 2026, the atmosphere itself began to keep time. It started with storms. Meteorologists noticed unusual synchronization between weather systems thousands of kilometers apart. Cyclones in the Indian Ocean, pressure cells over the Atlantic, and jet stream oscillations above North America all began to pulse in patterns echoing the 20.01-second interval. At first, the link seemed absurd. Weather systems operate on scales of days and weeks, not seconds. But when satellites stitched the data together, the rhythm was undeniable. Turbulence fluctuated in resonance, like beats superimposed on chaos. Then came the rain. Across South America, rainfall patterns shifted abruptly. Torrential downpours fell in unnaturally regular bursts, lasting precisely 20 seconds before easing, then surging again. Farmers reported fields flooding like someone opening and closing a faucet. Instruments confirmed it. Precipitation itself had joined the rhythm. In Siberia, permafrost sensors registered thaw-freeze cycles occurring in sync with the pulse. In the Mediterranean, sea waves stacked into repeating intervals, their crests unnervingly uniform. Climate scientists, trained to find noise, now saw order creeping into every dataset. The most dramatic sign came from the Arctic. On March 22nd, sea ice extent showed a sudden and anomalous contraction. Not random melt, but rhythmic pulses of breakup captured by ESA's Cryosat-2. Every 20.01 seconds, cracks spread outward like clockwork, then paused, then spread again. Satellite images revealed geometric fracture lines, as though nature itself had been templated. For the first time, climate became less chaotic. But order here was not safety, because ecosystems depend on unpredictability. Irregular rains, random winds, stochastic currents. Strip that away, and stability collapses into fragility. Crops adapted to seasonal variants began to show stress. Fisheries reported mass die-offs as plankton blooms peaked and vanished in unnatural regularity. Even insect swarms shifted their emergence cycles, arriving in rigid waves instead of organic clusters. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change convened an emergency session. Their leaked notes were grim. We are no longer modeling climate as a chaotic system. We are modeling it as a synchronized one. This has no precedent in Earth history. The question was no longer whether Atlas posed a threat to Earth's environment. It was whether Earth's environment had already ceased to be its own. The cultural response mirrored the science. Some saw the rhythmic storms and geometric ice fractures as signs of divine order. Others panicked, convinced the planet itself was being rewritten. Hashtags like a clockwork Earth and weather machine trended globally. But for those watching the data, one conclusion became inescapable. If Earth's biosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere were now entrained, then humanity was no longer a species living on a planet. It was a population inhabiting a module. By April 2026, the tone of scientific reports shifted from observation to countdown. The data spoke with cruel clarity. Atlas's frequency shifts, once erratic, now followed a precise mathematical sequence. From 1994 to 21.03, then 23.02, then locked at 20.01 seconds after Halcyon. Each transition matched ratios found in Fibonacci progressions, golden means, resonances known in physics and biology alike. It was no longer random modulation. It was a program advancing through stages. Analysts across NASA, ESA, and JAXA tried to project the next steps. Some believed the sequence would stabilize permanently at 20.01 seconds, freezing Earth into eternal synchronization. Others feared further iterations, shorter pulses, faster cycles, driving systems into instability until collapse. The boldest hypothesis came from Caltech mathematicians that the process had a finite endpoint. They modeled the sequence as convergent, predicting a terminal phase sometime in late June 2026. At that point, they argued, the program would conclude. What came after, silence, transformation, or destruction, was unknowable. The phrase, end of sequence, entered classified documents. Meanwhile, new signs suggested acceleration. Solar physicists noted that the rhythmic oscillations within the sun had deepened, no longer confined to surface plasma, but measurable in core neutrino flux. The sun itself was ticking, and each tick fed directly into Earth's new climatic regularities. Biologists grew alarmed. In labs worldwide, microbial cultures began to display synchronized growth spurts, dividing in near unison across independent facilities. Evolutionary randomness, the generator of life's diversity, seemed to be draining away. Life itself was becoming clockwork. And yet, not all saw doom. A minority of scientists proposed that Atlas was stabilizing environments, preparing them for some higher state. Perhaps synchronization was not destruction, but calibration. Perhaps Earth, Moon, Mars, and Sun were being aligned for a collective function beyond our comprehension. But others were less optimistic. A confidential ESA memo carried the stark warning, processes that converge tend to terminate. We are not witnessing equilibrium. We are witnessing execution. Public unease grew. Leaks about the end-of-sequence prediction spread through forums, picked up by news outlets hungry for clicks. Panic surged, countered by movements like the Atlas Watchers, who now proclaimed the coming date as Ascension. Mass gatherings in cities worldwide prepared to welcome what they called the final pulse. Governments issued careful denials. No, Atlas was not influencing the sun. No, Earth was not in danger. But behind closed doors, military simulations carried darker titles. Termination protocols. They planned for grid collapse, for communication blackouts, even for the possibility of biospheric shock. Because the hardest truth was this: the process looked like a countdown, and no one knew what would happen when it reached zero. By late April 2026, the anomalies changed character. They were no longer just pulses in machines, storms in the atmosphere, or arrhythmias in the human heart. They began to reach into memory itself. On April 21st, at precisely 12 Aus UTC, data centers in 3 different countries, Germany, Canada, and South Korea, simultaneously reported corruption of archives. Not sabotage, not hardware failure. Files simply vanished, overwritten by empty space. In every case, the missing data aligned to one category: historical records older than 50 years. Medical databases lost mid-20th century patient histories. University servers dropped entire digital libraries of scanned archives. Even NASA's own digitized mission logs, Gemini, Apollo, Voyager, showed gaps where files had existed just days before. The servers remained intact, but their contents had been erased in precise 20.01-second intervals. The phenomenon spread. Private users reported corrupted hard drives, missing photos, vanished emails. What alarmed investigators most was the selectivity. Files weren't erased at random. They were targeted. Recent documents remained, the oldest ones dissolved. Historians called it the silent blackout. And it wasn't confined to the digital world. Physical archives began to fail in uncanny ways. A fire alarm triggered in the British Library, sprinklers soaking paper manuscripts that had survived centuries. A burst pipe flooded the Vatican's restricted archives. In Tokyo, microfilm reels grew mold overnight despite climate control. Each incident occurred within minutes of Atlas's pulse shifts, as though accidents themselves had joined the rhythm. The suspicion grew unbearable. Atlas was not just synchronizing Earth systems, it was pruning them. Why? Theories diverged. Some argued it was compression, a way of reducing noise, stripping redundancy before final computation. Others whispered about information harvesting, that human history was being sampled, extracted, then deleted once integrated into the sequence. The most chilling hypothesis came from an ESA data scientist. We are not losing history. We are being rewritten without it. Panic spread through academic communities. Universities raced to make redundant backups, but even offline storage failed mysteriously, drives clicking into silence. Governments scrambled to protect state archives, locking away physical copies in bunkers. The Atlas Watchers, by contrast, celebrated, claiming the deletions marked humanity's shedding of irrelevant past in preparation for the final pulse. For ordinary people, the effect was intimate: family photos gone, birth certificates corrupted, ancestral records erased. It felt less like a glitch and more like amnesia. And still, the pulse went on. Every 20.01 seconds, another beat, another cycle, another silent subtraction. One physicist at MIT, exhausted and hollow-eyed, summarized it in a midnight interview, later leaked. We thought Atlas was adding us into its function. Maybe it's subtracting us instead. Because what is a civilization without its memory? A clean slate. By early May 2026, archivists noticed something stranger than loss. At first, it was subtle. In Berlin, a historian scanning World War II records found dates slightly shifted. Battles recorded as beginning a day earlier than in established accounts. In Sao Paulo, medical databases restored from redundant backups showed altered case files. Patients listed as surviving who had died decades ago. The anomaly spread quickly. University libraries compared backups and found that entire paragraphs in classic texts had been rewritten, not destroyed, changed. NASA engineers cross-checked archival footage of Apollo 11 and discovered minute alterations in telemetry readouts. Numbers didn't vanish. They had been replaced. It was as if reality's bookkeeping was being updated. Digital forensics confirmed the impossible. Data wasn't corrupt in the normal sense. Checksums matched perfectly, as though the altered files had always existed. When users attempted to retrieve older versions, the drives insisted none had ever been different. The phenomenon earned a new name, the palimpsest effect. Governments moved to suppress discussion. Publicly, they blamed hacking, disinformation, and deliberate sabotage by hostile states. Privately, agencies admitted they were powerless. Offline backups, even those preserved on analog film or etched microfiche, showed creeping changes. Ink shifted, tones blurred, words bent into new forms. Scientists debated feverishly. Was Atlas overwriting human memory as part of its computation? Was history being compressed into a cleaner data set? Or worse, was Earth being aligned to a different version of itself, one consistent with some galactic ledger we could not see? Religious movements seized on the effect. The Atlas Watchers declared the rewritten past to be the true record, claiming humanity's mistakes were being erased in preparation for a higher future. Others recoiled in horror, calling it cultural genocide, the death not of people, but of memory itself. Ordinary people began to notice too. Family photo albums reappeared with different faces. Old newspapers carried headlines subtly altered. Some reported déjà vu at uncanny scale, remembering one version of events while holding physical proof of another. Social media exploded with a hashtag #KeWrongPast. And then came the most chilling discovery. At CERN, physicists analyzing long-term particle collision logs noticed anomalies not just in data storage, but in raw detector readouts. The results from experiments run a decade earlier no longer matched published findings. Cross-reference data implied different outcomes, as though the experiments themselves had been conducted under slightly altered laws of physics. The conclusion was unthinkable. Atlas wasn't merely altering human archives, it was rewriting the past into the present. Not retroactively, but systematically, in every place data intersected with memory. One ESA scientist wrote in a classified memo, "This is not erasure, it is version control. We are being committed to a branch of reality, not our own." And in that framing lay the most terrifying question yet. If the past could be altered into coherence with Atlas's rhythm, then what part of us would remain ours in the final version? By mid-May 2026, the palimpsest effect was no longer confined to archives. It began to appear inside people. Neurologists in London first noticed it. Patients reported vivid memories of events that official records now denied. One man insisted he had watched the Challenger disaster live on television in 1986. Yet the video archives now describe the launch as aborted before takeoff. A woman swore her grandmother had died in 2002, though medical databases listed her as alive until 2015. These were not isolated delusions. Across continents, millions experienced the same dissonance, memories diverging from recorded history. Some called it the false memory epidemic. Others used a different phrase, the fracture. Psychologists struggled to explain it. Normally, collective memory aligns with evidence, photographs, documents, shared testimony. But now, evidence itself had shifted. Memories clashed with the rewritten record, leaving minds suspended between versions of reality. The symptoms spread. People reported déjà vu lasting hours, sometimes entire days. Families argued over timelines of their own lives. Historians quit in despair, declaring their field meaningless. Even scientists faltered, as experimental results they remembered producing no longer existed in published form. Brain scans offered eerie clues. EEG and fMRI studies revealed synchronization spikes at the same 20.01-second interval already tied to Atlas. During these spikes, patients described flashes of alternate scenes, different street names, different governments, different childhoods. The brain seemed to be holding two timelines at once, switching between them in rhythm with the pulse. Governments panicked. Public trust fractured as citizens accused authorities of rewriting history. Conspiracy theories multiplied, some claiming time travel, others blaming mass hypnosis. But for those inside the scientific community, one possibility loomed larger, that Atlas was not just using Earth as a computational medium. It was aligning consciousness itself, forcing billions of human minds into a synchronized data set, just as it had with plasma, dust, and climate. The Atlas Watchers, now millions strong, embraced the fracture as revelation. They preached that divergent memories were glimpses of discarded realities, proof that Atlas was guiding humanity into a perfected timeline. To them, memory dissonance was not madness, but awakening. But for the rest of the world, it was unbearable. Suicide rates spiked, communities fractured, violence erupted as people clung to incompatible pasts. One group remembered wars that had never happened. Another swore political leaders were alive who had been dead for decades. Reality itself was splintering into factions. A leaked NASA report phrased it bluntly: consciousness is not catching up. We are living in a system with two versions of history, the one Atlas has rewritten and the one we still recall. The human brain was not built for dual-state existence. And in the margins of that report, an anonymous hand had scrawled a single line: perhaps the final stage isn't to destroy us, but to overwrite us. By late May 2026, the fracture began to heal, but not in the way anyone hoped. At first, it seemed like progress. Reports of memory dissonance declined. Fewer patients complained of false pasts. Families stopped arguing about contradictory timelines. Communities, once split by incompatible recollections, appeared calmer. But doctors noticed something unsettling. The patients weren't reconciling their memories. They were losing them. Entire swaths of personal history disappeared. People awoke unable to recall childhoods, marriages, or careers, not because they had forgotten, but because those memories no longer aligned with the rewritten record. Brains seemed to discard them, like corrupted files quietly erased by an operating system. Neurologists coined a new term: synchronization amnesia. EEG studies revealed what was happening. During the 20.01-second pulses, neural networks shifted, pruning connections tied to dissonant memories. Subjects described the process in chillingly similar words. It's like someone turned the lights off in a room I used to live in. The effect spread rapidly. Teachers forgot decades of lesson plans. Parents lost recollection of children who, according to official records, had never existed. Entire towns reported collective blanks. Holidays gone, disasters erased, even languages thinning as unused words simply failed to surface in conversation. And yet, those affected did not appear distressed. Once memories vanished, patients aligned seamlessly with the new version of history. They smiled, adjusted, moved on. Only the few who remembered both timelines, those caught mid-fracture, felt the terror of watching their identities dissolve piece by piece. Scientists struggled with the implications. If memories defined the self, Then who were these people now? The same individuals, updated to a new data set, or replacements entirely? Was continuity of consciousness preserved if the path behind it was rewritten? Philosophers called it the identity eclipse. Governments issued bland reassurances. Stress-related amnesia, they claimed. But leaked WHO documents told a harsher truth. Synchronization amnesia is increasing at exponential rate. By mid-June, a majority of humanity may no longer possess unreconciled memories. We are approaching a single, unified version of consciousness. The Atlas Watchers embraced it as salvation. The false selves are being shed, they proclaimed, so that humanity may finally live in truth. Their gathering swelled into millions, chanting in unison to the rhythm of the pulse, their faces calm, serene, emptied of conflict. But others recoiled in horror. To them this was not healing, it was erasure, a species being overwritten one mind at a time. One neuroscientist at MIT summarized it with devastating simplicity. They look the same, they talk the same, but the people you loved are gone. What's left is a version compatible with Atlas. And in that realization lay the darkest thought yet. Maybe the process would not end with memory. Maybe identity itself, the last remnant of chaos in an ordered system, was next. By June 2026, the world looked calmer than it had in months. Too calm. Airports ran without delay. Power grids balanced perfectly. Traffic flowed like clockwork. Markets, once volatile, now moved in graceful cycles, prices oscillating with mathematical precision. On the surface, humanity had entered an age of order, but within that order lived the unsynchronized. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 resisted the transition. Their memories refused to collapse into the rewritten record. They still recalled the Challenger explosion, the original Apollo tapes, parents who had died decades earlier. They lived in dual histories, one they carried, one the world insisted upon, and the world no longer tolerated them. Neighbors avoided them. Families withdrew in quiet suspicion. Workplaces dismissed them as unstable. Their words, their memories, their doubts sounded insane in a society that had already surrendered to coherence. In New York, a man was arrested after insisting his wife had been replaced. Official record showed she had always been different, and she herself believed it. In Cairo, a teacher was hospitalized after breaking down mid-lesson, shouting that half her students had never existed before last month. Across continents, similar reports spread, isolated voices shouting against an ocean of silence. The medical community labeled them residual fracture disorder. To governments, they were a destabilizing element. Quietly, special facilities were established. Treatment centers, where the unsynchronized could be contained, studied, or simply forgotten. But to each other, they were witnesses. Online, they gathered in hidden forums calling themselves the Last Dissonant. They shared memories, cross-checking details of vanished timelines, desperate to preserve fragments of the old world before they too dissolved. One haunting thread read, "We're not resisting Atlas. We're resisting forgetting." And yet, their numbers dwindled daily. Some surrendered willingly, entering the rhythm through meditation, aligning themselves to escape the agony of dual memory. Others slipped away suddenly, waking one morning with the dissonance gone, their memories rewritten, their identities absorbed into the new coherence. For those who remained, life became unbearable. The streets felt too ordered, conversations too synchronized. Even laughter sounded patterned, rising and falling with unnatural rhythm. To them, humanity no longer looked human. One survivor described it in a leaked recording. It's like living among mannequins that move. They smile, they breathe, they speak, but they're all the same, and they look at me like I'm the broken one. And the cruelest truth was this: they were the broken ones, broken only because they still carried the noise, the chaos, the irreducible mess of human memory. But in a world tuned to Atlas, there was no place for noise. By mid-June 2026, the countdown neared its predicted end. The world was quiet, too quiet. Reports of residual fracture disorder had nearly vanished. The last dissonant dwindled to a handful of scattered voices hiding in basements, deserts, or forests, clinging to memories no one else shared. Their online forums went dark one by one until only silence remained. Some suspected they had finally synchronized. Others whispered darker rumors that they had been resolved, erased as irreconcilable errors in the program. For the synchronized majority, life had never seemed better. Cities ran without congestion, grids without outages. Crime dropped to historic lows. Markets ticked with serene stability, as though guided by an invisible hand. Society no longer lurched with chaos. It pulsed, elegantly, predictably, in lockstep with the 20.1-second cycle that now governed the planet. But beneath the surface, anomalies betrayed the illusion of peace. Seismographs recorded tremors not from tectonic plates, but from rhythmic pulses rippling through the crust. Ocean tides rose and fell with mechanical regularity, as though seas themselves were awaiting instruction. Even the auroras, once wild displays of solar storms, now shimmered in steady waves, their curtains unfurling on schedule. Earth no longer behaved like a world. It behaved like a machine idling. NASA, ESA, and JAXA analysts watched in dread. Their models agreed. The process was converging. Atlas's sequence was reaching a terminal state. But what came after, shutdown, transformation, or escalation, remained unknown. The most unsettling discovery came from the Parker Solar Probe, still orbiting perilously close to the Sun. On June 14th, its instruments detected something impossible. The Sun's oscillations had stabilized fully, locked into the same 20.01-second rhythm as Earth. Our star, the turbulent heart of the solar system, now beat like a metronome. One astrophysicist described it in a report never released to the public. The solar system is waiting. The planets, the sun, even us, everything is synchronized. The next command will not come from here. Meanwhile, strange phenomena gripped ordinary people. Across the globe, millions reported the same dream. Standing in silence, staring upward at a sky filled not with stars, but with shifting grids of light. A lattice stretched across the cosmos, pulsing, waiting, as if Earth had joined a chorus too vast to comprehend. The Atlas Watchers declared the moment had come. They called it the Great Alignment. On June 20th, they gathered by the millions, chanting with the pulse, arms raised, eyes closed. They did not fear the end of sequence. They longed for it. For those who still doubted, dread was the only companion. They felt the stillness in the air, the unnatural order in the tides, the way the world seemed to pause every 20 seconds as if holding its breath. Earth was no longer a planet in motion. It was a system in suspension, waiting. June 21st, 2026, or RUTC, the moment every model, every whisper, every prophecy had anticipated. The pulse, steady at 20.01 seconds for weeks, began to change, not lengthening, not shortening, simply slowing. Across the world, clocks seemed to drag. Pacemakers ticked against their rhythm. EEG monitors in hospitals recorded waves stretching into unnatural intervals. Power grids hummed as if under strain, waiting for a beat that refused to arrive. At Euro 02 UTC, the pulse stopped. Silence. Seismographs flattened. Auroras froze mid-flicker. Ocean tides paused between rise and fall. For 20 heartbeats, the earth was still, as though physics itself had held its breath. Then, without warning, a new signal arrived, not from Atlas's halo, not from the sun, but everywhere at once. The magnetosphere vibrated. Satellites recorded bursts across every frequency. Seismic sensors reported a uniform tremor spanning the globe. It was not noise, it was structure, repeating, nested, recursive, like code unfolding across dimensions. The last dissonant, those few who still resisted synchronization, reported visions. Some described grids of light spanning the sky. Others saw Earth itself from above, glowing in geometric patterns, each city a node, each ocean a circuit. One chilling testimony came from a survivor in Buenos Aires. It wasn't us looking at Atlas anymore. It was Atlas looking through us. And then came the vanishing. Atlas, the object that had haunted telescopes for nearly a year, dissolved from observation. Webb could no longer find it. Gaia's tracking lost its lock. The dust halo scattered into nothing. In the space where Atlas had been, there was only emptiness, as if it had never existed at all. But the rhythm did not end with its disappearance. The pulse returned, no longer at 20:01 seconds, no longer measurable by human clocks. Instruments recorded fractional harmonics, strange intervals that slipped between seconds, impossible to pin down. Some called it a higher frequency, others a deeper one. The Atlas watchers fell to their knees, declaring the great alignment complete. Governments, paralyzed, issued no statements. Scientists stared at flatline data and argued whether they were witnessing victory, loss, or transformation. One quiet voice, buried in an ESA memo, framed it differently. A program has ended. We do not know if we were its input or its output. And for ordinary people, life continued. Machines ran, grids balanced, the world spun. But something felt altered, intangible yet undeniable. The stars looked sharper, shadows lingered longer, conversations drifted into strange harmonies. Children laughed in unison without reason. The sequence was over. But what had been executed, and for whom, remained a question without answer. Perhaps the greatest danger was not that Earth had been changed. Perhaps the danger was that Earth had been used. And in the silence that followed the final pulse, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. What if Atlas was only one line of code in a program still running across the galaxy? In the months that followed, Atlas faded from public memory as swiftly as it had arrived. News cycles shifted. Governments quietly sealed their reports. For most people, the final pulse became nothing more than an odd rumor, a story drowned by the weight of ordinary life. But in scientific circles, silence was heavier than explanation. The instruments never returned to normal. Subtle oscillations persisted in magnetometers and plasma readings, in the neural rhythms of human sleep, not loud, not disruptive, just present, a ghost frequency buried beneath the noise of existence. And the archives, they never went back. The rewritten histories remained intact, flawless, consistent. Children grew up learning versions of the past that their parents remembered differently, until even the dissonant memories faded into dream. Occasionally, Whispers spread of those who still resisted. People who swore the stars looked wrong, or that entire cities felt like replacements, perfect copies with something missing. They were dismissed as delusional, yet their voices lingered, fragile fragments of a world that might never have existed. Meanwhile, telescopes scanned the sky. Nothing was seen where Atlas once was. But sometimes, in the background of deep surveys, astronomers found anomalies, tiny shifts, unexplained flickers, faint structures repeating across the void, patterns too subtle to claim, too precise to deny. Was Atlas gone? Or had it only moved on, leaving Earth behind as a completed calculation? One ESA researcher put it in words that still circulate in hidden corners of the internet. We don't know if the danger passed. We don't know if it began. All we know is this: the solar system ticks to a rhythm it did not choose, and the silence between the pulses is never empty.